Hi, my name is Zoe Eagan, and I'm an educator here at the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. Today, for our virtual library series, we'll be going over glazing. In today's video, we will cover the stages of clay, what a kiln is, the various types of firings, and finally, how to apply glaze. Okay, so let's dive right in. The first thing that we're going to talk about are the stages of clay. Technically, there are 6 stages, but we can also break clay down into 3 stages for simplicity. We have greenware, bisqueware, and glazeware. Greenware can be broken down into 4 stages. The first stage is slip. This is when there is the maximum amount of water in the clay body. So it's going to be like a slurry. The second stage is wet clay. This is the time when we wheel throw, when we hand build, when we use the clay to make our object. The third stage of greenware is leather hard. That is when the clay is still slightly workable, but it has dried to a point where it is no longer completely malleable. The last stage of greenware is bone dry. The clay is no longer workable. It is completely dry and it is ready to be placed in the kiln for your bisque firing. This is also a time when, if you don't like what you've made, you can turn the clay back into slip easily. You'll just do that by submerging it in a bucket of water. After greenware, we have bisqueware. This is after the clay has gone through its first firing. Bisqueware generally gets fired to around cone 04 or cone 06. After the first firing, bisqueware can be glazed. You can also add underglaze. The only thing that you cannot add at this point is slip. And our final stage of clay is glazeware. This is when we have glazed our pot and we are ready to put it through its final firing. After reaching vitrification, the clay is no longer porous, meaning it will no longer absorb a large amount of water. The glaze is actually highly comprised of silica, which is our glass former. That is what prevents the pot or whatever it is that you've made from absorbing water. It makes it food safe and it makes it usable for daily life. Now let's talk about kilns. First things first, what is a kiln? A kiln is a specialized piece of equipment that is designed to superheat the clay. There are 2 types of kilns. There is electric, and then there are atmospheric kilns. Electric kilns fire in what we call oxidation. Oxidation is when there is an abundance of oxygen in the kiln during the firing process. On the other side, if we use an atmospheric kiln, we can do both oxidation and also reduction. A reduction firing is when we reduce the amount of oxygen that is in the kiln. The main noticeable difference between a reduction firing and an oxidation firing is the color of your glaze or the color of your clay. For example, in a reduction firing, porcelain will come out white with a slightly bluish tint. But in an oxidation firing, that same porcelain would come out white, but with a yellow tint. Now that we understand the basics of the firing process, let's talk about cones. Cones are what we use to measure the temperature of the kiln, but it is not simply temperature. Cones measure temperature over time. For example, cone 06 is 1,828 degrees Fahrenheit when the kiln is being heated at a rate of 108 degrees per hour. However, when the kiln is being heated at a rate of 240 degrees per hour, cone 06 would be 1,855 degrees Fahrenheit. This is because the ceramic piece needs to heat up evenly. You wouldn't want the outside of your piece to be at a higher temperature than the inside of your piece when the firing is complete. Heating at a gradual rate and holding at a specific temperature for a set amount of time is key to a successful firing. Let's go over the difference between underglaze and slip. While they are exceedingly similar, there are a few key differences. The first is that most underglazes are going to be bought commercially. While you can make your own underglaze at home, it's a little more complicated than slip. Most slips will be made at home in the pottery studio. Another key difference is that underglaze has a slightly higher concentration of silica than slip. Slip has a slightly higher concentration of clay particles, while underglaze generally maintains its appearance after the firing process. Slip will change color during the firing process. That is because underglaze is slightly more stable in its colorant uses, whereas slip generally relies on stains or other chemical agents to change the color. Last but not least, the difference between underglaze and slip is when they can be applied. Underglaze can be applied to wet clay, leather hard clay, bone dry, bisqueware. The only thing that it can't be applied on is glazeware. On the other hand, with slip, it can only be applied to leather hard or wet clay. Let's discuss the difference between underglaze and glaze. Glaze has a high concentration of glass-forming chemicals such as silica. This is what allows it to protect your ceramic object and make it less porous. That glass former is what makes it able to hold water. Whereas with underglaze, it does not vastly affect the porosity of your object. Another key difference is that underglaze can be applied under glaze, but glaze cannot be applied under underglaze. Now that we've gotten all the theory out of the way, let's take it to application. We're going to start with the simplest way to apply glaze, which is by brushing. Now I have a banding wheel here to make this a little easier, and I have my bisqued pot. Now again, glaze can technically be applied to an unfired piece, but while you're starting out, it's best to wait until after the object has been bisqued. The first thing I'm going to do is shake up my glaze. This will ensure that the water content of my glaze is distributed evenly. Because it's a commercial glaze, I do not have to worry about the chemicals being distributed unevenly because they are already fused, which is handy. Now I'm going to dip my brush in, and I'm going to wipe it off just like you would when you're painting your nails. And we're going to start by just applying a thin amount on the bottom, and then I'll work my way up. I'm going to try to be nice and even with my brush strokes. And I'll work my way all the way up to the top. Spinning as I go. And now I'm going to allow this to dry slightly before adding my second coat. Most commercial glazes will have you apply 3 coats, while it can be a little less and a little more depending on the glaze. Another thing that I like to do to make sure that my glaze is added evenly is I like to change the direction of my brush strokes. So you'll notice that at first I was going in a horizontal orientation, and now I'm applying using vertical brush strokes. Another thing that I make sure to do is leave at least 1/8 of an inch of room between my glaze and the bottom of my pot. This just ensures that my glaze doesn't drip and I don't have a pot that gets stuck to my kiln shelf, because that is never a good day. Again, I'll wait just a minute to allow that second coat to dry, and then I'll apply my third and final coat. Getting started with dip glazing, you'll need a 5-gallon bucket to store your glaze, and you'll also need a drill with a mixing attachment. You can find this guy in Home Depot near the concrete. So I'm going to go ahead and dip this in and turn it on. And so what I'm looking for here is I want to make a nice whirlpool. So I might even tip it on its side. And then I'm going to dip my hand. I know that this is not toxic, so it's okay to dip my hand down in the bottom. And I'm just going to feel and see if the bottom feels sandy, or basically if I can't feel the plastic. And it is feeling a little crusty. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a little more of a mix. I am going to try to break up some of that sediment down at the bottom with my fingers first, just to make things a little easier. and so I don't scuff up the bottom of my bucket too badly. While my hand is in here, I'm gonna go ahead and look at the consistency of my glaze. So I can see my wrinkles in my hand through the glaze, and the consistency is about that of heavy cream, which is just right. And we're good to go. I'm gonna lay this down, and then we'll get ready to dip our pot. Now I'm going to glaze the inside of my pot. Now I'm always gonna glaze the inside of a ceramic vessel first, and then glaze the outside. So I'm gonna use a clear cup, and I'm just gonna dip this in the bottom, or in my glaze, and I'm just gonna pour this right in. Then I'll just tip this over, and voila, the inside of my pot is glazed. Now, grabbing from the bottom, I'm gonna go ahead and dip the rest of the cup in the glaze. I'll let this drip for a second, and then we're good to go. Again, I left up here, it's probably about 1/4 of an inch, but again, at least 1/8 of an inch of room between the bottom of your cup and the glaze. If you've gotten glaze on the bottom of your pot, don't worry. You can always wipe it off with a wet sponge. So I'm gonna go ahead and wipe away any glaze that I don't want. And just like that, my mistake is fixed. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and follow the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub on all our social media platforms.